I pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' estate in Westport, Connecticut, watching the valets directing cars around the sprawling lawn where a massive white tent housed what looked like a wedding reception. The live jazz band's music drifted across perfectly manicured gardens, and I counted at least 100 guests mingling around cocktail tables draped in expensive linens. This was my younger brother Danny's 25th birthday celebration, and our mother Patricia had spared no expense. I adjusted my tie and grabbed the gift box from my passenger seat, a vintage Rolex Submariner that had cost me $8,000. After 5 years of building my cybersecurity consulting firm from nothing, I could finally afford such luxuries. I had just closed on a stunning penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. As I approached the tent, Danny spotted me and waved enthusiastically, his blonde hair perfectly styled and his designer suit clearly custom-tailored. The moment I stepped under the tent, I felt the weight of expectant stares from relatives and family friends I hadn't seen in months. My mother appeared beside me, her silver hair elegantly upswept and her emerald dress shimmering under the string lights. She embraced me warmly, but I caught something calculating in her bright blue eyes that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Lloyd, darling, we're so proud of everything you've accomplished," she said, her voice carrying across the nearby tables. "Your new penthouse is absolutely magnificent." I handed Danny his gift, watching his face light up as he unwrapped the luxury timepiece. The crowd gathered closer, admiring the watch as he strapped it to his wrist. My father, Robert, approached his weathered construction worker's hands, patting my shoulder with what seemed like genuine pride. His graying beard was neatly trimmed for the occasion, and his navy suit looked freshly pressed. "Speech time," Danny called out, raising his champagne flute. The band stopped playing and conversations died down as all eyes turned toward us. Patricia suddenly stepped forward, taking the microphone from the band leader with a practiced smile that sent chills down my spine. "Before we celebrate my wonderful son Danny," she began, her voice amplifying across the silent crowd, "I want to talk about what family truly means." She paused, scanning the faces of our relatives, neighbors, and family friends. "Family means sacrifice. Family means putting loved ones before personal desires." My pulse quickened as an uncomfortable silence settled over the gathering. Patricia's gaze locked onto mine with laser focus. "My oldest son, Lloyd, has been incredibly blessed with success," she continued, her tone becoming more pointed. "He's just purchased a beautiful penthouse in Manhattan, while his younger brother is still finding his way in the world." The crowd murmured appreciatively, but I sensed an underlying current I couldn't quite identify. "I think it's time for Lloyd to do the right thing," Patricia announced, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. "Danny is starting his adult life, and Lloyd is already established. Family comes first, and I believe Lloyd should give his penthouse to his brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. 100 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on me with expectant intensity. My mouth went dry as the implications of my mother's public demand crashed over me. She had orchestrated this moment using Danny's birthday celebration as a stage for emotional manipulation. My cousin Marcus, a burly insurance salesman from Hartford, stepped forward with crossed arms. "That makes perfect sense, Patricia. Lloyd's always been the successful one. Time for him to help out family." "Absolutely," chimed in Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who had known me since childhood. "A big city penthouse is wasted on a bachelor anyway. Danny needs somewhere nice to start building his future." I tried to find my voice, but the words stuck in my throat. This couldn't be happening. The crowd was nodding in agreement, and Danny stood there with a smug expression that told me he had been expecting this moment. "Come on, Lloyd," called out Tom Bradley, a local business owner who had attended every family gathering for the past decade. "Be generous with your little brother. You can always buy another place." My father stepped closer, his calloused hand gripping my shoulder more firmly. "Son, your mother's right. We invested everything in your education, supported you through college, bought you that car when you graduated. Time to give back to the family." The pressure was suffocating. Faces surrounded me, all wearing expressions of expectation mixed with barely concealed judgment. These were people who had watched me grow up, attended my graduations, celebrated my achievements. Now they were demanding I hand over the culmination of 5 years of relentless work. I worked 80-hour weeks for this. I finally managed to say, my voice barely audible over the murmurs. I sacrificed relationships, vacations, everything to build my business and earn that penthouse. "Oh, please," scoffed my Aunt Linda, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We all work hard, Lloyd, but family is more important than material possessions." The crowd's energy shifted from expectation to impatience. Someone in the back shouted, "Stop being selfish," and others began nodding more vigorously. My chest tightened as I realized this wasn't a spontaneous suggestion, but a coordinated ambush designed to pressure me through social shame. Then my grandmother Helen stepped forward, her frail frame supported by her silver walking cane. At 87, she commanded respect from everyone in our family. I had always been her favorite grandchild, and she had encouraged my entrepreneurial dreams when others doubted me. "Lloyd, honey," she said softly, her voice carrying despite its fragility, "I'm disappointed in you. I thought I raised you to understand the importance of family loyalty." Her words shattered something inside my chest. If my own grandmother, who had helped raise me and always believed in my potential, thought I was wrong, then maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was being selfish and ungrateful. The betrayal from my grandmother felt like a knife twisting in my ribs, but Patricia wasn't finished. She gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles white against the black handle. "Since everyone is here tonight," she announced with theatrical flair, "I think we should discuss exactly what this family has invested in Lloyd's success." The crowd leaned in, hungry for details that would justify their mounting hostility toward me. Private school tuition at Westport Academy, $60,000. She began counting on her manicured fingers. 4 years at Boston University, $240,000. The BMW we bought him for graduation, $45,000. Books, living expenses, clothing, medical bills. Her voice grew louder with each item. "We're talking about over $500,000 that Robert and I poured into Lloyd's future." The numbers hung in the air like accusations. I felt heat creeping up my neck as relatives nodded approvingly at this public accounting of my family's financial sacrifices. What Patricia didn't mention was that I had repaid them $50,000 over the past 3 years, or that I had been supporting my own lifestyle since college graduation. Danny suddenly stood up, his face flushed with excitement and champagne. "Actually, everyone, I have a confession to make." He grinned widely, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. "I've already been looking at Lloyd's penthouse online, and I've completely fallen in love with it." The crowd murmured with amusement, treating his announcement like a charming revelation rather than presumptuous entitlement. "The view of Central Park is incredible." Danny continued, pulling out his phone to show nearby guests photos he had somehow obtained. "I've already imagined where I'd put my furniture, which room would be my home office." He laughed as if this was all perfectly natural. "I mean, it's exactly what I need to really establish myself in Manhattan." Tom Bradley raised his champagne flute with a broad grin. "Sounds like Lloyd should step up and be a real man about this situation. Family takes care of family." The phrase "real man" stung more than I expected. These people were questioning not just my generosity, but my fundamental character and masculinity. I scanned the crowd, hoping to find even one sympathetic face, but saw only expectation and growing impatience. Sarah Martinez, my ex-girlfriend from 2 years ago, stepped forward with a pitying expression that made my stomach churn. She had started dating Danny 6 months after our breakup, and seeing her at family gatherings had been awkward but manageable. Now she was about to make it infinitely worse. "Lloyd was always selfish during our relationship," she announced to the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who claimed intimate knowledge of my character. "He cared more about work than people, more about money than love. This is exactly the kind of thing he would do." Her words felt like public humiliation, designed to destroy any remaining sympathy the crowd might have had for my position. Danny wrapped his arm around her waist possessively, both of them looking at me with expressions of moral superiority. "Give him the keys." Someone shouted from the back of the crowd, and the chant was quickly picked up by others. "Give him the keys, give him the keys." The rhythmic demand grew louder, transforming the elegant birthday celebration into something resembling a lynch mob. My Aunt Linda burst into tears, though her sobs seemed more performative than genuine. "Lloyd, you're tearing this family apart," she wailed, pressing her tissue to her eyes. "How can you be so cruel to your own brother?" The chanting continued, punctuated by individual shouts of "selfish" and "ungrateful." I felt completely surrounded, trapped in the center of a hostile crowd that had somehow convinced itself that my refusal to give away my home was a moral failing worthy of public condemnation. I tried once more to speak, raising my voice over the chanting. "This penthouse represents 5 years of my life. I worked 18-hour days, gave up weekends, missed holidays to build my business." "So what?" Marcus shouted back. "We all work hard. That doesn't mean you get to hoard everything while your brother struggles." "Danny's not struggling," I protested, but my voice was lost in the renewed chanting and shouting. The crowd had transformed from family and friends into something ugly and demanding, their faces twisted with righteous indignation. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Danny pulled out his phone again, but this time he was showing people screenshots of social media posts. My heart sank as I caught glimpses of the images over his shoulder. "I've actually been documenting my excitement about the move," Danny said with a laugh that sounded forced. "I've already posted about it on Instagram and Facebook. All my friends know I'm moving to Manhattan next month." The casual way he said it hit me like a sledgehammer. He had been telling people he was getting my penthouse before tonight's ambush. This entire confrontation had been planned in advance, orchestrated to apply maximum social pressure at the moment when I would be least able to resist. I stared at my brother, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. The smug confidence in his posture, the calculated timing of his revelations, the way he had positioned Sarah beside him for maximum emotional impact. None of this was spontaneous. They had been planning this attack for weeks, maybe months. The chanting grew louder, and I realized that my family had already decided the outcome of this confrontation. They weren't asking me to give up my penthouse. They were demanding it using social pressure and emotional manipulation to force compliance. The birthday celebration had been nothing more than a trap. I stood frozen in the center of the hostile crowd, my mind reeling from Danny's casual admission that he had already been announcing his move to my penthouse. The implications crashed over me like a cold wave. This wasn't a spontaneous request born from family love or Danny's genuine need. This was a calculated scheme designed to steal my property through public humiliation. "Wait a minute," I said, my voice cutting through the chanting. You've been telling people you're moving into my penthouse before even asking me." Danny's confident expression faltered for just a moment before he recovered with a dismissive laugh. "Come on, Lloyd. I knew you'd come around eventually. You're not heartless, even if you like to pretend you are." The casual cruelty of his words stung, but what hurt more was the approving murmur from the crowd. They saw his presumption as confidence, his theft as inevitable family sharing. Patricia stepped closer to the microphone, her voice taking on the sharp edge I remembered from childhood arguments. "Lloyd, you're embarrassing this entire family. We have 100 guests watching you act like a spoiled child who won't share his toys. This isn't a toy." I shot back, finding my voice despite the hostile atmosphere. "This is my home. I bought it with money I earned. Money you earned with an education we paid for." Robert interjected, his construction-weathered face hard with disapproval. "Son, if you don't do right by your brother, you're out of my will. I won't leave anything to someone who abandons family when they need help." The threat hung in the air like a challenge. Robert's construction business had been successful enough to buy this estate and fund Danny's lifestyle, but I had never expected to inherit anything anyway. Still, the public disownment felt like another layer of humiliation designed to break my resolve. "Dad," I began, but he held up his hand to silence me. "I'm not finished," he said firmly. "Your mother and I sacrificed our retirement savings to give you opportunities. We drove old cars, lived in a smaller house than we could afford all, so you could have the best education money could buy. Now, you want to act like you did it all yourself." Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had known me since I was 5 years old, stepped forward with disappointed eyes. "Lloyd, dear, I watched you grow up in this neighborhood. Your parents gave you everything, and now you can't even help your own brother. What would your grandfather think?" The invocation of my deceased grandfather felt like a low blow, designed to trigger childhood emotions and guilt. I remembered him teaching me about hard work and personal responsibility values that seemed completely forgotten in this moment of collective madness. William Chen, my father's longtime business associate and someone I had always considered a mentor, surprised me by joining the attack. "Lloyd, I've watched your career development with pride, but success means nothing without generosity. Your brother needs this opportunity more than you need a fancy apartment." His betrayal stung more than I expected. William had always encouraged my entrepreneurial ambitions and had even given me advice about business development. Now he was using his influence to pressure me into surrendering my achievement. Sarah stepped forward again, her face a mask of righteous concern. "During our relationship, Lloyd, you constantly chose work over people. You missed my birthday dinner for a client meeting. You canceled our vacation for a business trip. This penthouse thing is just more evidence that you value material success over human relationships." Her public dissection of our private relationship felt like a violation, but the crowd ate it up. They nodded sagely as if her testimony provided crucial insight into my character flaws. Danny squeezed her hand supportively, clearly proud of her contribution to the attack. "You know what?" Danny said, his voice gaining strength from the crowd's support. "I've actually already put a deposit down on furniture for the penthouse, custom pieces that will fit perfectly in that space." My jaw dropped. "You did what?" "Ethan Allen delivered a catalog specifically for penthouses in that price range," he continued with growing excitement. "I've ordered a leather sectional for $12,000, a dining set for $8,000, bedroom furniture for another $10,000. It's all being manufactured right now." The casual way he discussed spending $30,000 on furniture for an apartment he didn't own revealed the depth of his presumption. But what shocked me more was that no one in the crowd seemed bothered by this information. If anything, they appeared impressed by his initiative and planning. "That shows real commitment to making the space his own," Tom Bradley observed approvingly. "Lloyd should be proud that his brother cares so much about the gift." "Gift?" I repeated incredulously. "I never said anything about a gift." "Oh, stop being dramatic." Patricia snapped, her patience clearly exhausted. "Of course it's a gift. Family doesn't charge family rent for basic housing needs." The conversation had shifted completely beyond my control. What had started as a suggestion that I give Danny my penthouse had evolved into an assumption that I had already agreed, with discussions now focusing on logistics rather than whether this would actually happen. My cousin Marcus moved closer, his bulk intimidating in the growing darkness. "Lloyd, you're making this way harder than it needs to be. Just give your brother the keys and stop embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" I asked, my voice rising with frustration and disbelief. "Yes," came a chorus of voices from the crowd. "Yes, you are." That's when I learned something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Danny pulled out his phone yet again, but this time he was scrolling through what looked like text messages and social media conversations. "Actually," he said with a grin that now looked predatory, "I should probably mention that I've already quit my job at the marketing firm." The words hit me like a physical punch. "You quit your job?" "Well, yeah," Danny shrugged casually. "I won't need to work much once I have the penthouse. I can rent out the spare rooms to my college friends for $1,500 each. With 3 roommates, I'll be making $4,500 a month just from rent, Plus, I can use the main bedroom and living areas. It's basically like getting paid to live in luxury. The mercenary calculation behind his planning became crystal clear. This wasn't about needing a place to live or starting his adult life. This was about converting my home into his personal profit center, using my property to generate income, while he avoided the responsibility of building his own career. "You're going to turn my penthouse into a boarding house," I asked, my voice barely concealing my horror. "Not a boarding house," Danny corrected with mock offense. "A luxury shared living space for young professionals. It's very trendy right now." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Danny's so entrepreneurial. He's always thinking of creative ways to maximize opportunities." The crowd murmured approvingly at this characterization of what I saw as blatant exploitation of my generosity. They were treating his scheme to profit from my property as evidence of business acumen rather than parasitic opportunism. Patricia suddenly burst into tears, though her sobs seemed as calculated as everything else about this confrontation. "Lloyd, I can't believe you're being so cruel to your own family. After everything we've done for you, after all the love and support we've given you, this is how you repay us." Her tears triggered a wave of sympathy from the crowd, with several women rushing to comfort her while glaring at me accusingly. I realized that every aspect of this confrontation had been choreographed to paint me as the villain, while positioning my family as suffering victims of my selfishness. "You know what, Lloyd," Patricia said, her voice breaking with emotion. "If you can't find it in your heart to help your brother when he needs you most, then maybe you never really loved this family at all." The accusation that I didn't love my family felt like the final assault on my character and motivations. I looked around at the sea of hostile faces, people who had known me my entire life, but were now ready to believe that I was fundamentally selfish and unloving. When I still didn't respond with immediate capitulation, my mother's expression shifted from tearful pleading to cold fury. "Fine," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "If you want to be an ungrateful, selfish monster who puts money before family, then live with the consequences." Before I could react, her hand flew across my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent tent. The slap burned across my cheek, but the emotional pain cut far deeper than the physical sting. 100 people watched my mother strike me, and not one voice rose in my defense. Instead, I heard murmurs of, "He deserved that, and maybe that will knock some sense into him." I stood there with my hand pressed to my burning cheek, finally understanding that this was never about family love or Danny's needs. This was about power control and the assumption that my success belonged to them simply because we shared blood. The silence that followed my mother's slap felt heavier than the earlier chanting. 100 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting to see if the public humiliation would finally break my resolve. My cheek burned where Patricia's hand had connected, but the emotional sting cut far deeper than any physical pain. I looked around at faces I had known my entire life, searching for even a flicker of sympathy or recognition that this had gone too far. Instead, I saw expressions ranging from smug satisfaction to righteous approval. Mrs. Henderson nodded as if the slap had been long overdue. Tom Bradley crossed his arms with a look that suggested I had brought this punishment on myself. "Lloyd," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of final authority, "you need to apologize to your mother for making her lose control like that. This whole situation is your fault for being so stubborn." The demand for an apology after being publicly assaulted felt surreal, but I could see from the crowd's expectant faces that they genuinely believed I owed Patricia remorse for provoking her violence. The moral universe of this gathering had completely inverted, with my resistance to theft positioned as the real transgression. Danny stepped forward with his arm still around Sarah, both of them wearing expressions of barely concealed triumph. "Come on, Lloyd," he said with false concern. "Just apologize and give me the keys. This doesn't have to get any uglier." The casual way he discussed making things uglier revealed how calculated this entire confrontation had been. They had planned multiple escalation tactics, with physical violence apparently being an acceptable option if emotional manipulation failed to achieve their goal. I stood there for another moment, hand still pressed to my stinging cheek, realizing that these people would never see me as anything more than a resource to be exploited. My achievements, my sacrifices, my 5 years of relentless work meant nothing to them, beyond how those accomplishments could benefit their own desires. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the tent. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice rising again. "That's right, run away," she called after me. "Run away like you always do when family needs you." The crowd's murmurs followed me across the dark lawn to my car, their voices carrying judgment and disappointment that I had failed to meet their expectations of surrender and compliance. I drove away from the estate with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the sound of my mother's slap still echoing in my ears. The 40-minute drive back to Manhattan gave me time to process what had just happened, but the reality felt too surreal to fully comprehend. My own family had publicly demanded that I surrender my home, and when I refused, they had physically assaulted me while a crowd of witnesses cheered them on. My penthouse had never felt more like a sanctuary than it did that night. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park's dark expanse, and the silence felt luxurious after hours of hostile voices demanding my compliance. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on my leather sofa trying to understand how my family relationships had deteriorated so completely without my awareness. My phone started buzzing almost immediately with text messages from various family members. Marcus sent a message saying I was dead to the family until I came to my senses. Aunt Linda wrote a long paragraph about how disappointed she was in my heartless behavior. Even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly messaging me about my selfishness and betrayal of family values. The coordinated nature of the text message campaign revealed yet another layer of planning behind tonight's ambush. They had prepared talking points and divided up the task of applying continued pressure through multiple channels. This wasn't spontaneous family disappointment, but rather an organized assault on my resistance. Around midnight, I received a message from Sarah that made my blood run cold. "Danny wanted me to tell you that he's already contacted your building's management company. They'll be meeting with him tomorrow to discuss the lease transfer. Hope you're happy with your choice." I stared at the message for several minutes, processing its implications. Danny was moving forward with claiming my penthouse regardless of my consent. He had apparently been planning this for long enough to research the building's policies and initiate contact with management. I immediately called the building's main office number, reaching the overnight security desk. The guard who answered confirmed my worst fears. "Yes, sir, Mr. Lloyd. We received a call earlier this week from someone claiming to be your brother. He said you wanted to transfer your lease to him and requested the necessary paperwork. Did he provide any documentation?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "He's scheduled to come in tomorrow morning with signed transfer documents," the guard replied. "He mentioned that you're moving to London for work and won't be needing the apartment anymore." The lie about London was creative and specific enough to sound credible, especially if Danny had somehow obtained personal information about my business plans. I did have a consulting client in London, though I had never mentioned relocating there. "Sir," I said carefully, "I never authorized any lease transfer. If my brother shows up tomorrow with documents, they're fraudulent. Please alert building management immediately." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the night researching identity theft and fraud laws in New York. What Danny was attempting clearly constituted multiple felonies, but I wondered if my family understood the legal consequences of their actions, or if they believed family relationships somehow exempted them from criminal prosecution. By dawn, I had received 43 text messages, 12 voicemails, and countless social media notifications as various family members and family friends continued their campaign to pressure me into compliance. The messages ranged from guilt-inducing pleas to direct threats about social and financial consequences if I didn't surrender my penthouse. But what disturbed me most was a Facebook post I discovered from my cousin, Marcus, written at 2 in the morning. "Some people get successful and forget where they came from. Family loyalty means nothing to these selfish types. Very disappointed in certain family members who put money before love." Though he hadn't mentioned me by name, The dozens of comments made it clear that our extended family and social circle understood exactly who he was discussing. People I had known since childhood were publicly denouncing my character and expressing support for my family's position. The social media campaign revealed the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about a penthouse anymore. My family was systematically destroying my reputation within our community, painting me as a selfish villain who had betrayed everyone who had ever helped me. As I sat watching the sunrise through my penthouse windows, I realized that last night's confrontation had been just the beginning of their campaign to take my home. They had prepared multiple strategies for applying pressure, and physical violence had been only their first escalation tactic. I was about to discover just how far they were willing to go. At 8 in the morning, I stood in the marble lobby of my building waiting for Danny to arrive with whatever fraudulent documents he had prepared. I had alerted the building manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, about the attempted fraud, and she had agreed to meet with us together to resolve the situation. Danny appeared precisely at 9 o'clock, carrying a manila folder and wearing a confident smile that suggested he expected this meeting to be a formality. His surprise at seeing me waiting there was quickly replaced by irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his casual tone not quite hiding his annoyance at this unexpected complication. "Protecting my property," I replied simply. Mrs. Rodriguez, a professional woman in her 50s who managed several luxury buildings in Manhattan, looked between us with obvious confusion. "Mr. Danny, I think there's been some miscommunication here. Your brother never authorized any lease transfer." Danny opened his manila folder with practiced confidence, pulling out several official-looking documents. "Actually, I have Lloyd's signed authorization right here, along with financial documentation showing my ability to take over the lease payments." I looked at the papers over Mrs. Rodriguez's shoulder and felt my stomach drop. The signatures looked remarkably similar to my handwriting, and the letterhead appeared to be from my consulting firm. Someone had invested considerable time and effort into creating convincing forgeries. "This is my signature," I told Mrs. Rodriguez, pointing to my actual signature on the lease agreement in her files. "Compare it to these documents. They're forgeries." Mrs. Rodriguez examined the papers carefully, using a magnifying glass to compare signature details. After several minutes, she looked up with a stern expression. "Mr. Danny, these signatures are clearly fraudulent. The pressure patterns and letter formation are completely different from your brother's genuine signature. This is a serious crime." Danny's confident facade cracked for the first time, revealing a flash of panic before he recovered his composure. "Look, this is just a family misunderstanding. Lloyd agreed to this, but now he's having second thoughts. Families work things out privately. Forgery is not a family matter," Mrs. Rodriguez replied firmly. "It's a felony that could result in prison time. I'm obligated to report this to building security and potentially to police." As Danny realized his plan was collapsing, his mask of reasonable concern completely disappeared. "Fine," he snapped, "but Lloyd's going to regret this. Our family has ways of making him understand his obligations." The threat was unmistakable, and Mrs. Rodriguez made a note in Danny's file before escorting him out of the building. But his parting words had revealed something crucial. This forgery attempt was just one part of a larger strategy to force my compliance. Over the next few hours, I began to understand the true scope of my family's scheme. A forensic accountant I hired to examine my financial records discovered that someone had been accessing my old joint bank account with my parents, an account I had forgotten to close after college. They had been monitoring my deposits and withdrawals for months, tracking my income and spending patterns. More disturbing was what the accountant found when he dug deeper into my credit history. Someone had been using my personal information to apply for loans and credit cards, though most applications had been rejected due to inconsistencies in the supporting documentation. The rejected applications still showed up on my credit report, lowering my score and creating a pattern of suspicious activity. "Whoever did this has detailed knowledge of your financial situation," the accountant explained. "They know your income, your banking habits, your credit score. This isn't random identity theft. This is someone with intimate access to your personal information." I realized that my family had been planning this systematic attack for months, gathering financial intelligence, and preparing multiple strategies for forcing me to surrender my penthouse. The birthday party confrontation had been just their most dramatic tactic, not their only option. My investigation revealed even more disturbing information. A private investigator I hired discovered that Patricia had been contacting my business clients over the past month, claiming to be concerned about my mental health and reliability. She had told several clients that I was going through a difficult time and might be unreliable for major projects. "Your mother has been systematically damaging your professional reputation," the investigator reported. "She's contacted 12 of your major clients with stories about your alleged instability and potential business disruption." The professional sabotage explained why 2 clients had recently canceled projects without clear explanations. Patricia had been deliberately undermining my business relationships while positioning herself as a concerned family member rather than a saboteur. Robert had been conducting his own campaign of professional destruction, reaching out to mutual business contacts with warnings about my character problems and suggestions that I might not be reliable for partnerships or collaborations. He had used his construction industry connections to spread doubts about my integrity and business ethics. Sarah's involvement became clear when I discovered that she had been posting carefully crafted messages on social media, sharing concerns about my mental health and suggesting that I had been acting strangely in recent months. Her posts were designed to look like worried observations from an ex-girlfriend rather than coordinated character assassination. The most devastating discovery came when I learned about my grandmother Helen's involvement. The investigator found that Patricia had been pressuring Helen for weeks, telling her elaborate stories about my selfishness and abandonment of family values. Helen's public statement at the birthday party hadn't been spontaneous disappointment, but rather the result of systematic manipulation by my mother. "Your grandmother has been receiving daily phone calls from your mother," the investigator explained. "Patricia has been feeding her carefully crafted stories designed to turn Helen against you. The elderly woman genuinely believes you've become cruel and selfish." Learning about Helen's manipulation hurt more than any other betrayal. My grandmother had always been my strongest supporter, and discovering that her disappointment had been manufactured through lies and emotional manipulation felt like losing her all over again. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The investigator's financial analysis revealed that my family was in far more serious debt than I had ever imagined. Patricia had been gambling heavily at casinos in Atlantic City, and Foxwoods accumulating losses of over $90,000 in the past year alone. She had hidden these debts from Robert by opening credit cards in both their names and using their home as collateral for multiple loans. Danny's financial situation was even worse than his parents'. He owed $68,000 across 7 credit cards, had defaulted on his student loans, and had been taking cash advances to make minimum payments on his existing debts. His decision to quit his job made perfect sense when viewed in the context of his financial desperation. He needed my penthouse not just as a place to live, but as a source of rental income to service his crushing debt load. Robert's construction business was failing due to a combination of mismanagement, unpaid taxes, and his own poor financial decisions. The company owed over $150,000 to suppliers and subcontractors, and the Internal Revenue Service had placed liens on both the business and personal assets. Combined, my family owed nearly $500,000 to various creditors, and they had been planning to use my penthouse as their solution to this financial crisis. Danny's scheme to rent out rooms wasn't just about generating pocket money. It was about generating enough income to service debts that threatened to destroy their entire financial future. The scope of their desperation explained the coordination and intensity of their attack on me. This wasn't about family values or Danny's housing needs. This was about financial survival, and they had decided that my success made me responsible for solving problems I had never known existed. As I reviewed the investigator's report, one final detail caught my attention. Danny had been researching my building's policies and procedures for weeks, but he had also been investigating the luxury car dealership where I had test-driven a Porsche the previous month. Somehow he had used my personal information to complete the purchase of that car, forging my signature on financing documents and providing false employment verification. The Porsche was sitting in a parking garage in downtown Manhattan, registered in Danny's name, but financed through fraudulent loans secured with my stolen identity. He had also used my information to secure a luxury apartment lease in Soho, providing false income documentation and listing my consulting firm as his employer. My brother had committed multiple felonies while running up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt, all using my stolen identity as collateral. The family's demand for my penthouse was just the tip of an iceberg that included systematic identity theft, fraud, and financial crimes that could result in federal prosecution. I realized that I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was defending my entire financial future from a family that had decided to destroy me in order to save themselves. The evidence of my family's criminal conspiracy was overwhelming, but I needed to understand the full extent of their fraudulent activities before deciding how to respond. I spent the next week working with forensic accountants and attorneys to document every instance of identity theft, forgery, and financial fraud. What we discovered was a systematic campaign that had been in development for over 6 months. Patricia had been the mastermind coordinating activities between Danny and Robert while maintaining plausible deniability for her own involvement. She had used her access to family documents and childhood memories to provide Danny with the personal information necessary for identity theft. The luxury car fraud was even more extensive than I had initially realized. Danny hadn't just purchased one Porsche, he had bought 3 high-end vehicles using my stolen identity, including a BMW convertible and a Mercedes sedan. The total value of the fraudulent car loans exceeded $240,000, all secured with forged documentation that listed my consulting firm as his employer and provided false income statements. The luxury apartment in Soho was just one of 4 properties Danny had attempted to secure using my identity. He had successfully obtained leases for 2 other apartments, including a penthouse in Brooklyn and a loft in Queens. His plan appeared to involve renting out multiple luxury properties while living in my Manhattan penthouse, creating a real estate empire built entirely on identity theft and fraud. My attorney Janet Morrison reviewed the evidence with the grim expression of someone who had seen financial fraud before, but rarely at this scale or level of family coordination. "Lloyd," she said, "your family has committed enough felonies to face decades in federal prison. The identity theft alone carries penalties of up to 30 years, and when combined with the wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy charges, we're looking at potential sentences that would effectively be life imprisonment for all involved parties." The severity of the potential consequences was sobering, but what disturbed me more was learning about the sophisticated planning that had gone into their criminal activities. They had researched federal fraud investigation procedures, studied identity theft prosecution patterns, and developed strategies for avoiding detection. Patricia had been particularly careful to route her communications through encrypted messaging apps and to avoid creating written records of their conspiracy. She had coached Danny and Robert on maintaining consistent stories if questioned by authorities, and had prepared alibis and explanations for every aspect of their criminal activities. "This wasn't impulsive desperation," Janet explained. "This was a carefully planned criminal enterprise designed to systematically steal your identity and use it to solve their financial problems. They understood the legal risks and chose to proceed anyway." The realization that my family had calculated the possibility of destroying my life and decided it was acceptable collateral damage in their financial scheme was perhaps more painful than any of their individual betrayals. They had weighed the consequences of ruining me against the benefits of saving themselves, and they had chosen to sacrifice me without hesitation. But the investigation revealed one more piece of information that transformed my understanding of the entire situation. The private investigator discovered that Sarah's involvement wasn't motivated by loyalty to Danny, but by her own financial desperation. She owed $43,000 in student loans and credit card debt, and Danny had promised to pay off her debts once he gained control of my penthouse rental income. Sarah had been systematically documenting my business activities and personal relationships, providing intelligence that Patricia used to target my clients and professional contacts with maximum effectiveness. Her social media posts about my alleged mental health problems had been coordinated with Patricia's phone calls to my clients, creating a reinforcing narrative designed to destroy my professional reputation. The discovery that my ex-girlfriend had been conducting surveillance on my personal and professional life for months felt like a violation beyond anything my family had done. Sarah had intimate knowledge of my business relationships, personal habits, and psychological vulnerabilities, and she had weaponized that knowledge for financial gain. "She's been feeding information to your mother for over 4 months," the investigator reported. "Every client meeting, every business trip, every personal relationship has been reported back to Patricia for use in their campaign against you." Armed with complete documentation of my family's criminal activities, I faced a choice that would define not just my immediate future, but my fundamental understanding of justice and family loyalty. I could report their crimes to federal authorities and watch them face decades in prison, or I could try to resolve the situation privately and risk enabling further criminal behavior. Janet strongly recommended full prosecution. "Lloyd, these people have committed serious federal crimes that go far beyond family disputes. If you don't prosecute, you're essentially telling them that crime pays and family relationships excuse criminal behavior." But the decision wasn't purely legal, it was emotional and moral. These were people who had raised me, celebrated my achievements, and been part of every significant moment in my life. The thought of sending my own mother to federal prison felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I could uncross. However, as I reviewed the evidence one more time, I discovered something that made my decision inevitable. Danny had already begun using my identity to secure additional loans and credit lines, accumulating another $60,000 in fraudulent debt just in the week since his failed attempt to steal my penthouse lease. Rather than retreating when his initial plan failed, he had escalated his criminal activities, apparently believing that family loyalty would protect him from consequences, regardless of how extensively he destroyed my financial future. That realization eliminated any remaining ambiguity about my choice. My family wasn't going to stop their criminal behavior voluntarily, and every day I delayed prosecution allowed them to cause additional damage to my identity and financial standing. I called Janet Morrison and told her to proceed with filing criminal complaints against all 3 family members. It was time for my mother, father, and brother to learn that blood relationships don't excuse felony convictions. The following Monday morning, I walked into the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office in Manhattan with my attorney and a box containing 6 months of documented evidence against my own family. Special Agent Maria Santos reviewed our materials with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to complex financial crimes. "Mr. Lloyd," she said after 2 hours of examination, "this is one of the most comprehensive cases of coordinated identity theft and fraud I've seen in 15 years of federal law enforcement. Your family has committed enough crimes to warrant a multi-year investigation." The criminal complaints were filed that same afternoon. Patricia, Robert, and Danny were arrested simultaneously at their respective locations, with FBI agents executing search warrants that uncovered additional evidence of their criminal conspiracy. Patricia's computer contained detailed spreadsheets tracking my income and expenses, while Danny's apartment revealed forged documents for dozens of fraudulent transactions. The arrests made local news within hours, with headlines describing a family fraud ring that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars through identity theft and forgery. The irony of their criminal activities becoming public knowledge after they had worked so hard to destroy my reputation wasn't lost on me. Sarah was arrested 3 days later when investigators discovered her role in the surveillance and intelligence gathering operation. Her social media posts, which she had intended as subtle character assassination, became evidence of conspiracy and coordination in criminal activities. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once the full scope of evidence became clear. Faced with overwhelming documentation of their crimes and the prospect of decades in federal prison, all 4 defendants agreed to plea bargains that included full restitution, community service, and probation with strict financial monitoring. Patricia was required to enter gambling addiction treatment as part of her plea agreement, and her probation included restrictions on casino visits and financial transactions above $500. Robert's construction business was liquidated to pay restitution, and he was banned from operating any business involving financial management for 5 years. Danny received the harshest sentence due to the extent of his fraud: 3 years of probation, 18 months of community service, and complete restitution for all fraudulent loans and purchases. The luxury cars were repossessed, The fraudulent apartment leases were voided, and his credit was destroyed for the foreseeable future. Sarah's plea agreement included 2 years of probation and a requirement to delete all social media accounts, along with restrictions on contacting any of my business associates or clients. Her student loans remained her responsibility, but her dreams of debt forgiveness through Danny's rental income scheme had evaporated completely. The financial restitution process took 8 months to complete, but it revealed the true extent of their desperation. Patricia and Robert were forced to sell their Westport estate and move into a modest apartment using every dollar of proceeds to pay court-ordered restitution and legal fees. The comfortable lifestyle they had maintained through credit and deception was permanently destroyed. But the most satisfying aspect of the resolution wasn't the criminal consequences or financial restitution. It was watching my family members finally confront the reality of their choices and begin to understand the damage they had caused. Patricia's gambling addiction treatment forced her to acknowledge how her destructive behavior had endangered her entire family's future. For the first time in years, she had to face the consequences of her actions rather than deflecting blame onto others or seeking easy solutions through manipulation. Robert's business failure forced him to confront decades of poor financial decisions and the reality that success requires actual effort rather than entitlement or family exploitation. The humiliation of bankruptcy and criminal conviction became the catalyst for genuine self-reflection he had avoided for years. Danny's complete financial collapse forced him to get a real job for the first time since college graduation. Working 40 hours a week at an entry-level position while living in a studio apartment provided him with perspective on the value of money and the effort required to earn genuine success. 6 months after their arrests, I received a handwritten letter from my grandmother, Helen. She had learned about Patricia's systematic manipulation and was horrified to discover how her genuine concern had been weaponized against me. "Lloyd," she wrote, "I'm ashamed that I allowed myself to be used as a tool to hurt you. Your mother told me terrible lies about your behavior, and I was foolish enough to believe them without hearing your side. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who should have known better." Her letter was followed by attempts at contact from other family members who had participated in the birthday party ambush. Most claimed they had been misled about the situation or hadn't understood the full context of what they were supporting. Their excuses felt hollow, but their obvious regret suggested that public criminal prosecution had achieved something private. Confrontation never could have. A year after the birthday party that changed everything, my consulting business had grown stronger than ever. The clients who had been targeted by Patricia's sabotage campaign respected how I had handled the crisis with professionalism and legal precision. Several new clients specifically mentioned that my integrity under pressure had convinced them to trust me with their cybersecurity needs. My personal life had also improved dramatically. I started dating Maria Gonzalez, a fellow entrepreneur who had built her own marketing consultancy from the ground up. She understood the demands of building a business and respected the boundaries necessary for maintaining both professional success and personal well-being. Maria had come from a family that celebrated individual achievement rather than demanding collective sacrifice, and she helped me understand that healthy families support each other's success rather than exploiting it. Her perspective on family dynamics helped me process the trauma of my own family's betrayal while building new relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I also established the Lloyd Morrison Scholarship Foundation, providing financial assistance to students from dysfunctional families who were pursuing business or technology education. The scholarship recipients understood the challenge of building success despite family circumstances that worked against achievement rather than supporting it. Working with scholarship recipients reminded me that blood relationships don't automatically create family bonds. While shared values and mutual respect can create family connections with people who aren't biologically related. My chosen family of business associates, clients, and friends provided the support and encouragement that my biological family had failed to offer. The penthouse that had triggered the entire crisis became a symbol of hard-earned success rather than family conflict. I hosted regular gatherings for my consulting team's scholarship recipients and genuine friends who celebrated achievements rather than demanding redistribution of success. Looking back on that awful night when my mother slapped me in front of 100 witnesses, I realized that her assault had been a gift disguised as an attack. It had forced me to see my family clearly for the first time, and to understand that tolerance of exploitation isn't family loyalty. It's enabling destructive behavior that ultimately hurts everyone involved. The birthday party confrontation had revealed that my family saw me as a resource to be harvested, rather than a person to be respected. Their criminal conspiracy had demonstrated that they were willing to destroy my life to solve problems they had created through their own poor choices. But most importantly, their systematic attack had taught me that real family relationships are built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The people who love you celebrate your success and support your boundaries, rather than demanding that you sacrifice your achievements for their benefit. My biological family had failed that test completely, but my chosen family had passed it with distinction. The friends, colleagues, and mentors who supported me during the crisis became the foundation for relationships based on authenticity rather than obligation. Standing in my penthouse 2 years later, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, I realized that sometimes you have to lose a family to find one. The price of that discovery had been painful, but the result was relationships built on choice, rather than chance, respect, rather than exploitation, and love, rather than manipulation. True family doesn't demand that you diminish yourself to make others feel better about their own choices. True family celebrates your success and supports your growth rather than punishing you for achieving what they couldn't accomplish themselves. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity? How do you handle relationships with people who love you but don't respect your boundaries? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building authentic relationships. Share this story with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics, because sometimes we all need to know that choosing ourselves isn't selfish when others are choosing to exploit us. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships that celebrate your success rather than punishing you for it. Until next time, keep building the life you've earned and surrounding yourself with people who genuinely want to see you thrive.